many consider a taboo addiction and the controversy surrounding it, thrust onto the front page by the Tiger Woods scandal. It's estimated that some 6% of Americans are addicted to sex. But is that true? Or is sex addiction just an excuse? There are doctors on both sides of the issue, some questioning whether it even exists. Chris Connolly reports for our series, Modern Sex in America.
With his reported stay at a Mississippi clinic that treats sex addiction now said to be complete, Tiger Woods can prepare for his return to the golf course and to a world still reeling from the tawdry parade of his alleged extramarital partners that marched across the newsstands last year. That world will apparently also need to deal with Woods' new identity as a sex addict, joining public figures like David Duchovny and baseball broadcaster Steve Phillips as those who've sought treatment for sex addiction, as Phillips explained to the Today Show.
People look at sex addiction as an excuse. It's not an excuse. I'm fully responsible for everything I did.
But if Tiger Woods is a sex addict, some say, well, who isn't? Others ask, is there even such a thing as sex addiction? This doctor says no.
Addiction is like a handy metaphor. Whether it's a good clinical diagnosis, whether the concept of sex addiction helps us understand people's behavior, that's an entirely different subject.
Dr. Marty Klein is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a sex therapist for nearly 3 decades.
Some people describe themselves as sex addicts.
Some people describe themselves as being invaded by the devil, but that doesn't make it true.
The idea of sex addiction can sound like a get-out-of-the-doghouse free card, a medically certified image-rescuing excuse for caddish behavior.
A lot of people, though, are thinking sex addiction, that's a way to take something that guys would just normally do and turn it into something that sounds like an illness. It's like an excuse.
Yeah, my sex addiction made me do it. No, I get it. And unfortunately, that's what makes this disorder that much more complicated.
At his Beverly Hills clinic, the Control Center, Dr. REEF treats sex addiction. He says it's real and destructive to the lives it affects.
I'm not talking about, yeah, you know what, I feel kind of down sometimes and I masturbate. I'm talking about masturbating to the point where you're bloodied up, where you're so emotionally distraught, you meet criteria for depression and have thought about suicide on a regular basis.
Benoit DENIZET-LEWIS says he lived that life and knows the pain and loss of control that sex addiction brings.
Sex addiction is real, and it's an incredibly powerful, maddening addiction in the same way that drugs or alcohol or gambling is. It was causing me to do things that were insane in my mind. I was driving 200 miles to meet someone that I'd met on the computer. I was spending 6 hours at night looking at pornography when I had to get up in the morning at 8 o'clock and go to work.
Dr. Klein, though, views such syndromes as obsessive-compulsive disorders that shouldn't be viewed solely through the prism of sex.
When people have obsessive-compulsive disorder, sometimes they wash their hands 40 times a day, and sometimes they act compulsively sexually or on the internet. We don't send people to hand-washing clinics, and we shouldn't be sending people to sex addiction clinics. People should be treated for their obsessive-compulsive disorder. Calling these problems addiction as a clinical diagnosis sends these people into a very narrow alley of treatment.
In recent years, popular culture has poked fun at the au courant sex addiction concept, like in the Will Ferrell comedy Blades of Glory.
I'm a sex addict. It's a real disease with doctors and medicine and everything.
In the real world, the Control Center conducts a battery of tests and evaluations to screen for sex addiction, which afflicts no more than 3 to 6% of the population.
I get asked a lot by men that are like, Doc, am I a sex addict? And most of the time I say, no, you're just a jerk. You know, most of the time, it's not sex addiction.
Do you often have to disappoint patients by saying you're not a sex addict?
Oh, yeah. I've had a couple of patients that I've been like, okay, I looked at your neuropsychological testing. You did not meet criteria for sex addiction. And I had a guy who was like super depressed. He's like, what am I going to do? And he was really disappointed.
Going out and having sex all the time can be fun, but when sex is running your life, when you no longer have the ability to regulate your sexual behavior, that's not fun anymore.
Sex addicts must also deal with their own brand of cold turkey detox, Along with drugs and therapeutic treatments, they agree to celibacy contracts.
Celibacy contract is essentially, you're not going to have sex. You're not going to have sex with other people. You're not going to have sex with you, masturbatory sex. You are not going to utilize the mechanism of sex for a while, usually for a year.
How do people deal with not having sex of any kind for a year?
It's really hard. It's very hard.
If you have to strip away somebody's sexuality in order to help them deal with their sexuality, it's not clear to me that you've benefited this person very much. We want to help people deal with their sexual feelings.
Therapist Jill Vermeer also works at the Control Center.
You can't really help a heroin addict if he's shooting up every single day. You got to get him off the drug first.
I took a celibacy vow. I actually did 9 months of celibacy.
Jenny KETCHAM was the porn star Penny Flame before appearing on the reality show Sex Rehab with Dr. Drew in hopes of boosting her business.
As soon as America saw my cute little freckled face, they'd be all over buying my porn. And then after about a week and a half, the feelings started to come up. And when I didn't know what to do with those feelings, I was like, okay, something's wrong. And Joel was like, well, yeah, you're a sex addict.
What's it like to hear those words for the first time?
Well, at least, you know, there's a program of recovery. There are places I can go to get help. So hearing I'm a sex addict, at least there's hope.
Before that, Jenny says, hope had been in short supply.
People hear the word sex addiction or I'm a sex addict, and they don't necessarily think of someone like you. Were you having indiscriminate sex 24 hours a day?
I would classify myself as a workaholic in terms of pornography. I would have sexual partners whose names I didn't know. I'd kick them out of bed before 2 a.m. so I could sleep all by myself. I would random hookups that didn't mean anything.
Treatment didn't cure her addiction, Jenny says. Nothing does. But being in recovery has been transformative.
I told Jenny this. First time you start having sex in recovery, it's going to be like having it your first time ever.
What was it like for you?
There's a lot of feelings going on, and it's not like any sex I ever had before. And I've had a lot of different kinds of sex. This is the kind of sex I want to have.
Dr. REEF Karim feels confident that his sex addiction therapies will indeed get his patients healthier and not just get them off the hook.
How can you convince me it's an addiction?
I bring in the research. I look at people's ability to connect emotionally. I look at the neuropsychological testing. I look at how when I give some of these patients medications, their lives change. I look at how when they actually get treatment, they change.
For Nightline, I'm Chris Connolly in Los Angeles.